Welcome to the God is the Issue podcast with Brad Bright. I'm your host, Jim Brangenberg. Think about it. Our view of God determines what we think on all moral, cultural, and economic issues. It even determines how we vote. Hope for the future of our country and our world lies in our ability to make God the issue in every issue. Now, recently we recorded a podcast entitled, Is It a Sin to Not Vote? Where we focused on Matthew 25, that as a steward of your God-given vote, it is a sin to bury it in the ground rather than invest it. We also touched on how to vote wisely. So this is the follow-up to that podcast, expanding and expounding on the question, how can I vote wisely? It's not designed to tell you who to vote for or what political party to support. The goal is to pass on practical information to help you more wisely invest the vote God gave you. This is part one of a two-part podcast series entitled How to Vote Wisely. Brad Bright is here today to parse out all the details. Brad Bright, thanks for being with us today.
Jim, it's great to be with you, and I'm not sure about the parsing, but we're going to talk about it.
Well, parsing and parsley are both on the dinner plate for tonight, so we'll just figure that out for both of ourselves. All right, so Brad, before we get into the details on how to decide who to vote for or to vote against, give our listeners some context of what we're discussing today.
Well, you know, this podcast really comes out of, I hear people expressing frustration of who do I vote for? How do I figure out how to vote? Who do I vote against? I hear that everywhere I go, every election cycle. And so this is really to help people understand, okay, where can I find the information I want? What are the things I should be looking at as I evaluate candidates or issues? So, you know, because many things influence how we vote. Communication style, personality, what a person says, how they say it, you know, do they seem trustworthy? You know, what are their policy positions? Maybe they claim to be a Christian, or maybe you vote a lot from a position of fear. We want to talk about all these things because, you know, elections, Tim, they're a $1 billion industry, and there's a lot at stake. Candidates pay dearly for marketing people, to manipulate you, to trick you, to scare you, to woo you. They know if they can scare you, they can control how you vote. They know that because then they can circumvent your rational faculty in your head. You know, and they hire skilled coaches to help them package their messaging extremely well and their public speeches. And reality is, many of these folks are extremely intelligent and they're skilled at their craft. I remember when my mom on the National Day of Prayer was up in Washington, D.C., invited to the White House, and she was meeting with President Clinton, National Day of Prayer. And she said, this was one of the most charming men I ever met. She said, if I had not been clear about who he was, I would have been sucked in within 5 minutes. I mean, Bill Clinton has incredible people skills, and he used them very, very well. So, and even my mom said, you know, if I had known who he was, I would have been sucked in. I remember, too, when I was in D.C. during the 80s, there was a congressman who was known to be a strong evangelical congressman, you know, man of integrity, strong guy. But everybody in Washington, we knew him to be an overt liar. He wasn't to be trusted anywhere, and yet he was regarded across the country, and especially in his district, as a very godly congressman. So, you know, I could tell you a lot of similar stories. But my point is, you can't trust the packaging. Some of these guys have silver tongues, and they use them well. It's like Saruman in the Lord of the Rings, if you've read the Lord of the Rings. Your only defense against him was to just not listen to his voice, because if you listen to his voice, he would eventually draw you in. The best defense is to assume these guys aren't on the level with you. You know, it's like the joke in Washington, D.C. How can you tell when a politician's lying? Their lips are moving. Now then, that brings me to the point of this podcast.
That's kind of harsh, by the way. That's just kind of...
It is. But you have to assume it as you go into this arena, because there are some folks that are truth tellers. There are some politicians that are truth tellers, but you can't assume that. You have to assume they're not. See, but the point is, if you can't trust a politician's words, how do you decide how to vote? And in the next few minutes, that's what we're going to be talking about.
Where do you recommend a person start? I mean, this is such an overwhelming process. Where do you recommend that a person start in this process?
You know, I would use voter guides, and my favorite voter guide is iVoter Guide. I strongly recommend it as a resource to help evaluate candidates. And here's why I recommend them over almost any of the others. They use the exact same grid to evaluate every single candidate so you get great comparison between the candidate, and they don't weight votes. You see, a lot of these ratings, they rate the vote, they weight it in order to get a desired outcome, a desired contrast. iVoter Guide doesn't do that. They use the same grid on every single candidate. So you really do, and they work hard to be honest and be fair. So you really do get a good perspective on who these candidates are. And as long as iVoter Guide continues to do that and to use the exact same grid, I'll continue to recommend them.
And they do have a great reputation for being nonpartisan. I love that. So do you have a grid that you use for evaluating candidates, some sort of a parsing system? Because we said we're going to parse today. What criteria do you use?
I guess I do have a parsing system, and actually I have 6 criteria. And my first criteria is I look at their integrity. And by that is, do their words and their actions match? If not, I ignore their words and go with their actions. Do their words and their votes match? If not, I go with their votes and evaluate them based on their voting record. You know, what I want to know is, do they tell the truth? But here's the thing. You have to be careful because they can fool you with even how they say they vote. Many are great at making statements that are technically true, but that they're highly misleading. You just got to be aware of that.
So it goes back to that lips moving thing. All right, so I think we all have an idea what you're talking about because we've seen it demonstrated on television and hear it on the radio. But can you give us some personal examples, some examples that you can that reference this?
Well, I remember in the 80s when SDI, the Strategic Defense Initiative, was before the Congress and the Senate, and the Reagan administration was trying to get it pushed through. There was one congressman, I won't tell you his name, won't even tell you the state he's from, but he went out there and he went back to his home district and he told the liberal groups that he'd voted against funding for SDI. And he told the conservative groups that he'd voted for SDI. That is Strategic Defense Initiative. Both statements were true. Because here's what he did. First, they took a vote on SDI itself, and he voted for it. Then they took a vote on funding SDI, which he voted against. So technically, he told the truth. But the point was, it's highly, highly misleading. So you have to be aware that some of these guys will play those games. I remember working for Senator Armstrong. And one day, Senator Metzenbaum from Ohio got up on the floor of the Senate, and he started pontificating how top corporations aren't paying their fair income tax. And he was really lambasting them. And Senator Armstrong came back to the office and said, okay, I'm pulling just about everybody in the office, and we're going to start calling the major corporations in America the next 2 days to find out how much total tax they're paying and what taxes they're paying, not just the income tax. So, got on the phone. We found all this out. Come to find out, income tax is one of the smallest taxes that corporations pay. And so 3 days later, Bill Armstrong gets up on the floor of the Senate and starts reading off what the major corporations had paid in actual tax, not just income tax, holding Senator Metzenbaum accountable. Well, just let me give you a current example of what this looks like. One of the things they're saying, corporations aren't paying their fair share. They're not paying their income taxes. Well, let's take Amazon. Amazon last year. They paid $2.3 billion in income tax, but their total tax bill was $11.5 billion. So the income tax only makes up 20% of the taxes they pay.
Wow.
So if you hear politicians say, well, they're not paying their income tax, they pay almost no income tax. Well, it's true because it's one of the smallest taxes that many corporations pay. So you have to listen carefully to their words because they'll fool you with their words if you're not listening carefully. It's like Barack Obama. Remember when he got up, he was the State of the Union address, I think, and he said, the debate is settled. Climate change is a fact. Well, he's right. We were all taught in school that there was an ice age. The Bible teaches us there was a global flood. Well, so climate change it's settled science. It is a global fact. But notice what Barack Obama did not say. He did not say that man-made global warming is a fact. Never said it. And there's a reason why. It's because he's too smart to have said it. He's a very skilled politician. So you have to pay attention to whether they're a truth teller or, here's the contrast, not a liar, a truth teller or a truth bender. And that's what you have to look for.
Wow. We're talking about how to vote wisely, and we're getting really started, and Brad's going through his 6 basic voting criteria. We're going to get through that in the next couple of segments. Really want to invite you to stick around with us. We got a lot of great information for you today. You're listening to the God is the Issue podcast with Brad Bright, and we'll be right back.
Want to know more about how you can make God the issue in every issue? Get your copy of Brad's book, God is the Issue. Now in its third edition, you can get your ebook copy at brightmedia.org. Even better, if you subscribe to this podcast, you'll receive a coupon for one free download of God is the Issue ebook. Go to brightmedia.org, that's brightmedia.org, and get God is the Issue ebook today.
Welcome back to the God is the Issue podcast with Brad Bright as we talk about how to vote wisely. And we're talking about Brad's 6 voting criteria. Brad, we talked about the first one, which is integrity. And you've given us some great examples there. A truth teller or a truth bender, that's what you put in there. That's a good way to look at things. Since half-truths are often more dangerous. There's a little bit of truth in almost everything I say. Those are far more dangerous than outright lies. People who use them usually know they're trying to deceive you. They know they're trying to twist it. Even C.S. Lewis, love C.S. Lewis, said that bent people are more dangerous than broken people. I believe he said that in the Paralendrus series. What's another criteria you use, Brad?
The second criteria I look at is a person's track record for any candidate. There's a saying in politics that past behavior is the best predictor of future behavior. And there's a lot of truth in that. Don't ever forget that past behavior is the best predictor of future behavior. It's not 100%, but it gives you a very, very good idea. I mean, we know people can change, but it's wise to keep this saying in mind when a candidate's words and track record diverge. Unless you can clearly identify why the candidate changed, go with their track record. If you can't identify the why, because remember, never underestimate the ability of a seasoned politician to deceive you. And that's one of the reasons why I recommend iVoter Guide, because it just gives you a very good, straight, fair comparison between candidates without weighting votes, without trying to make one candidate look good or the better. It's just who they are by and large. And again, there are other rating groups out there, and you can go find them out there that rate based on taxes and different things. But I regard iVoter Guide to be one of the most reliable ones out there.
It's the second time you've referenced iVoterGuide.com, which again, I agree with you. Are you affiliated with them? Do they pay you to plug them?
No, not at all. Full disclosure, I used to be on the board, and it's part of the reason why I know exactly the processes they use. In politics, I helped design other polls that we weighted. When I worked for the party, we weighted votes. We did it intentionally to make one candidate look better and one candidate look worse. iVoter Guide doesn't do that, and I know that firsthand because I used to be on the board, but I am no longer. I think they're great, but no longer on the board.
So what's the third criteria you use on how to vote wisely?
I look at their associates, their friends and their associates. Remember the proverb your mother taught you, you can judge a man by the company he keeps? I remember hearing that many times growing up. There's a lot of wisdom in that saying. The person that I hang around with, that I'm with a lot, they are going to influence me. And I probably hang around with them because, frankly, we probably agree on a lot. We like each other and we agree on a lot of things. Here's the point. Go online, read articles about who they spend time with. Find out who their friends are, who they hang around with. That'll tell you a lot. I remember when Barack Obama ran for president, he said, he was a community organizer. And I thought, well, I've heard of a community organizer before. Saul Alinsky was a community organizer, and Saul Alinsky wrote Rules for Radicals. He called himself a Marxist. I thought, well, I wonder if there's any connection. So I went online and researched, and I found out the guys who trained Barack Obama to be a community organizer were personally trained by Saul Alinsky. That told me something. Does that mean Obama was a Marxist? No, but it means I better at least be aware that he could be. So all those things you read, you see who they associate with, begins to give you an idea of who they are.
Well, that's great advice in a lot of areas of life. And yes, my mom used to say, if you keep hanging out with those people, you're going to act just like them.
A lot of truth in that.
Yeah.
As one of my teachers said, if you lie down with dogs, you get up with fleas, right?
Yeah, it's true. All right. Is there anything else on check out who they hang out with?
Well, not so much who they hang out with, but under the same thing of associates, is you need to really look at another component, and that is who do they hire? who's their chief of staff, who is their legislative director, who are their key people, who handles all their press. In politics, there's a saying that personnel is policy. Personnel is policy. That means the people you hire to implement your ideas are the ones that ultimately control what is actually done and what is not done. So the point is, no matter what a politician says, if they don't hire people who are going to do it, it's not going to happen. So that's why you need to look closely at the chief of staff, and key advisors, find out who the candidate has hired in the past and where those people stand, and do a little bit of research on the people that are close around the candidate. That'll tell you a lot about what's actually going to happen.
So true. So what's the fourth criteria of the 6 basic voting criteria you look at in order to make sure that we vote wisely?
Well, this one's going to shock you. Money. Follow the money. Money runs politics. Wish it didn't? It does. You look at who gave money to the candidate, not just who gave money to the candidate, but who is the candidate given money to? What PAC have given money? And if the candidate has a PAC, who did that PAC give money to? Where that money flows will tell you a lot about what they believe.
PAC. What's a PAC?
Political Action Committee.
Okay.
That's just a way, it's a legal way of helping a candidate, or helping, it can either be cause-oriented or candidate-oriented to really help promote a cause or a candidate outside and apart from that specific candidate. Yeah,
so just want to make sure, just in case somebody didn't know.
And congressmen, senators, presidents, they all use PACs. They all vote. But here's the point. You want to really find out where the money is, and you're willing to take the time, go to the Federal Elections Commission, the FEC website, and it'll list everyone who has donated to that candidate. It'll also list everyone that candidate has donated to. So it takes some time, a little bit of work, but you can flesh all that out, and it'll give you a pretty good idea what this candidate supports. If he supports something with his money, you bet he'll support it with his vote. There's another place you can go, though, and I say this with a little bit of caution. It's opensecrets.org, and I say it with caution because they're quite left of center. However, they really do a lot of work of helping you see who's given to the candidate and what groups have given to the candidate. So if you want to get a quick general idea, it's actually a good place to go. But just be aware that they're quite liberal in their persuasion, and they're going to try to sway people accordingly. But they also do good information on digging out information. One other word of caution is a lot of business people and businesses give to both of the leading candidates. And you say, well, why? Well, basically, they're buying influence. They're doing it legally, but it's all about having access to the candidate. So they donate to both candidates, so they think it's a close race, so they can have access afterward. That may be questionable ethics, but it is shrewd business, and it's extremely common. So you need to be aware of that. The other thing is, you want to find out who payrolls their wife and their kids and their siblings. Well, where are those folks making money? And are they working for a group that actually has a dog in the political hunt, so to speak? Pay attention to that. You have to go online, find out who their spouses and kids are, start reading, and find out who do they work for and who funds them.
Find out who's buttering their bread. All right, I would never have thought about finding out where the spouse and kids get money from, but it makes sense. That could be a backdoor way of kind of buying the influence of a candidate. There's sure nothing wrong with money, but just the love of money. 1 Timothy 6:10 says, the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. A lot of people misquote that one. They say it's the root of all evil, but it's the root of all kinds of evil. So where a candidate and his family get their money from and how they spend it, that's an awfully important thing to consider. What are your final 2 voting criteria? Let's take a break. And I want to come back, and in the final segment, let's talk about those final 2 voting criteria as we talk about how to vote wisely in this part 1 of a 2-part series. Brad, this is an incredible conversation, Brad. We'll be right back.
Brad Bright travels the country speaking and training people how to make God the issue in every issue. Go to brightmedia.org, that's brightmedia.org, to find out how you can bring Brad's highly interactive workshop to your area. It's fun, engaging, and most important, it will help make you more effective in making God the issue in every issue. Go to brightmedia.org, that's brightmedia.org, and schedule Brad today.
Welcome back to the God is the Issue podcast with Brad Bright, as we're talking about how to vote wisely. And we're talking about Brad's 6 voting criteria, basic voting criteria, as you evaluate candidates. And Brad, we're on number 5. Your voting criteria number 5. What's number 5?
Endorsements. That is, what individuals have endorsed the candidate? What groups have endorsed the candidate? But don't forget, also, who is the candidate endorsed? What candidates and what groups has the candidate endorsed? That'll give you a big clue as to how the candidate will vote after he or she is elected. Endorsements are a big thing to look at. And the final one is again, words. Now, if they've consistently said the same thing for 20 or 30 years, I may consider what they say. Otherwise, I believe actions speak louder than words. And it's true. So I turn down the volume and vote based on the first 5 criteria. Words are at the bottom of the list for a reason. I don't rely on them unless there's no other thing to look at.
Oh, it's quite a list. All right, let's review that list. So the first one's integrity. And we're looking at the integrity, then you look at their track record, then you're looking at who they're hanging out with, their associates, where their money's going and where it's coming from.
And also who they hire.
And who they hire. Oh, good. Thank you for the clarification. Then money. Follow the money both in and out. Then you're looking at who are they endorsing, who are they being endorsed by, and then finally, the last, the least, the smallest piece, look at their words. Wow, that's some pretty practical criteria, Brad. Is there anything else you consider when evaluating political candidates?
Oh, yeah. I look at the job description of the job that they want to fill. And people say, they say, what do you mean job description? Well, what a person does, a congressman does, a senator does, a president does, should influence the way you evaluate. I mean, it should make a huge difference in how you vote.
We're really out of time. And before we pick up a brand new conversation, I want to dig deeper into that job description thing, Brad. Do you think we can carry that over to next week's podcast?
We'll do it.
All right. I think it's great.
We'll start with federal candidates, but we'll do some of the lower level candidates as well.
All right. It's fantastic. How to vote wisely, part 1. Great layup. The 6 criteria that Brad recommends that you use to evaluate your voting. Thanks for listening to us today on to listen to Brad Bright on the God is the Issue podcast. Brad, you did a great job parsing this out today. I appreciate it. Thanks, Brad.
Fun parsing with you, Jim.
Thanks for joining us today on the God is the Issue podcast with Brad Bright. Remember to check us out online at brightmedia.org, brightmedia.org. A lot of great resources out there. In fact, Brad, before we go, we've got one resource that we should make sure people know is out there on your website.
Well, that's true. It's your 7 duties as a Christian citizen. It's a booklet. It's very practical. It gives you practical things that you can actually do to help influence the process and to be a smarter voter and a smarter citizen of the United States. Just very practical stuff from a biblical perspective. Set your 7 duties as a Christian citizen. You can get it at brightmedia.org.
Brightmedia.org. All right, remember to check us out online and get a copy of that book, Your 7 Duties as a Christian Voter. Is that what you said it was? All of a sudden I just...
As a Christian citizen.
Christian citizen. Sorry. Wow, I had blank. Remember, when you're having these conversations with people, remember to always be kind, be compassionate, and shrewd while making God the issue in every issue.